Third-rate portraits portend a third-world nation. When the collapse begins, people generally don't realize it. Rarely do statesmen acknowledge the golden age of their nation has passed. Every leader tells his people their best days lie ahead. And the rituals of statecraft, above all, are designed to impose a sense of continuity and eternity. The nation is forever, the state is uncontested. Even a revolutionary regime tries to co-opt the legitimacy of its predecessors, not confess to the masses that it is composed of mediocrities and frauds. Decline is usually subtle, except when it's not, like when the official paintings of Barack and Michelle Obama were unveiled at the National Portrait Gallery on Monday. The President of the United States is the head of state as well as the head of government. The official portrait is a serious matter. Whatever we think of a president or his policies, he represents the nation. Thus, the official representation of a president is in some sense a representation of that nation. President Obama chose as the artist for his portrait one Kehinde Wiley, a diversity twofer who is both black and gay. Mr. Wiley's prints, all of which feature non-whites, portray blacks framed in kaleidoscopic backgrounds of flowers. This means Mr. Wiley does not have to grapple with perspective, and it gives each painting a cheap look, like an airbrushed drawing that you can get on a t-shirt. As lovingly chronicled in the Washington Post, Mr. Wiley thinks that blacks are portrayed too negatively in the media, and that this leads to horror such as the death of Mike Brown in Ferguson. His art is meant to correct this charade, this two-dimensional caricature of blacks, as he puts it. Mr. Wiley's artistic viewpoint is best described as resentful plagiarism, which contradicts his stated purpose of avoiding caricature. His characteristic technique is to substitute blacks into great works, such as Jacques-Louis David's Napoleon Crossing the Alps. If Black Lives Matter, they deserve to be in paintings, he comments. The result is not an homage to classic works, nor even parody. It is affirmative action applied to painting, something below a derivative. Blacks are inserted into other paintings out of a feeling of entitlement, because the paintings seem cheap and uninspiring. And because the paintings seem cheap and uninspiring, they only serve as an insult to the original. Making unattractive knockoffs of classic works as an appeal for inclusion or recognition should make one feel sorrow. It is another way of saying that Africa does not have its own tradition of painting worth studying and exploring. But rather than producing something authentic, Mr. Wiley gives us glorified photoshops that portray a rapper as if he were Napoleon Bonaparte. The whole conversation of my work, he says, has to do with power and who has it. But his work is not an actual expression of power. It's a plea for a handout or for recognition. One hates to psychoanalyze, but President Obama has noted that both Mr. Wiley and himself were emotionally scarred by being abandoned by African fathers and raised by American mothers. There is an even more disturbing element in Mr. Wiley's work. Some of his versions of classic paintings, such as Gentileschi's Judith slaying Holofernes, depict black women holding the decapitated heads of white women. Mr. Wiley has lightly described it as a sort of a play on the whole kill whitey thing. It certainly fits the recent pattern of art crudely portraying the slaughter of whites at the hands of blacks. And lest presidential portraits simply be dismissed as a bureaucratic enterprise, some of the presidential portraits are indeed great art. Aaron Schickler's portrait of John F. Kennedy will always hit the viewer emotionally. Rembrandt Peale's Sphinx-like portrayal of Jefferson captures the man who remains the most mysterious and complex of the founding fathers. And when Barack and Michelle Obama unveiled their own portraits, they seemed taken aback rather than delighted. So, when an entire nation has to pretend representations of its former first couple are great works of art, rather than two glorified participation trophies, the nation loses its self-respect. Of course, it's not just the National Portrait Gallery. Every day we see a once prestigious institution or award hollowed out by political correctness or the demand that we accept the mediocre as somehow elevated. There comes a point when an honor from a mainstream cultural institution becomes self-discrediting. We have an affirmative action culture in which access to institutions is prized over accomplishment, talent, or even meaning. Simply put, America has become an affirmative action nation. Future historians looking through the portraits of American leaders will be able to tell when the transformation from first to third world took place, and these two presidential portraits will have us looking through the door.